Hi everyone, welcome to the second session of the SwiftUI live stream. This time we're going to take the experience that we've learned from last time and we're going to create something I believe is getting more and more interesting. So last time I had my camera in the middle of the code and people were complaining. Hi everyone, for good reason. Welcome to the second. I think the speaker is fine. Okay. And this time I'm trying to put the comments next to the screen that I have in front of me. So one of the challenges that we have while streaming is that, first of all, the comments are not really real time. It takes a bit of delay. So that's why there was kind of a big gap before I got to see that my camera was in the way. But secondly, now it's all prepared, so I can just move here and it's not going to be in the way of the code. So one thing I want to mention is that I included the source files, including the Figma file, and you can check it out if you want to kind of learn from scratch and from something that, you know, looks pretty good. And the other thing is from the Xcode project, this is where we finished. We don't have a lot of code up until now, and we managed to do something I believe is fairly interesting. So you can see that we managed to do a state animation. So having the two cards back and forth, and yeah, you know, this is using 3D transformation. This is using animation timing with delay on the second card, and it's also using the spring animation on the first card, and we're just doing a bit of offset animation with a boolean, which is a state, and we're just asking, well, is it animated? If so, then I'm going to move the X position, I'm going to move the rotation of the card, and I'm also going to move the rotation 3D effect of the background card. You can see there's a bit of a 3D rotation going on, which is really interesting. And yeah, you know, I think that's a basic interaction that any designer can just get started, or developer wants to really dig deep into the UI and the animation. This is kind of like a very basic setup. Now we're gonna switch it up a notch, and I think this is the part where it gets a lot more interesting. We're gonna get into the scrolling behavior, which is a very common interaction both on iOS and on the web. Scrolling is one of the biggest things that you can play with when it comes to making your app more interesting, and it's everywhere. You know, like it's on any landing page. You're going to see a lot of parallax scrolling effects. The Apple Watch has this peak scrolling where on the messages, when you swipe up, the bubbles become smaller, and that's exactly what we're going to try to do. The same with the notifications on iOS. In the widgets in the left side, you can scroll and you can see that it becomes sticky at the very top. So what are we gonna try to build today? This is the same technique that I'm using for this peak scrolling right here. You can see that as I scroll up, the card becomes smaller, and there's a bit of transparency, so using opacity, and also the bottom cards become bigger. So this interaction, instead of, you know, because we don't have a lot of real estate, so instead of going and disappearing right away, I can sort of peek at the content before even scrolling the entire thing. And I think that's interesting from a user perspective, to be able to peek, especially on a very small screen like the Apple Watch, when you can barely see one or two messages, and you can sort of scroll and you can see, oh, well, maybe I can read a little bit before scrolling even further. And that can be a really good, you know, use case for iOS apps, for, you know, for the web as well. And this is also the same technique that I'm using for the app that we're creating on the course. So for example, when I scroll here, you see this 3D effect going on, and we're gonna use essentially the same technique. So let's go here and sort of work step by step and see what we can do here. All right, and in the meantime, I look at the comments. It's right here. You don't see it, but it's in this empty space that I reserve for the comments. I see it. So if you have any question and if you have any alert for me and say, hey, you're hiding the screen, just feel free to do that. I'll be able to see it from now on. All right. Now, when it comes to prototyping, we want to get to maximum results in a minimum amount of time possible. Otherwise, we cannot compete with prototyping tools. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create components, because in Figma, as you create more and more elements, you're going to start creating components so that they can be reusable. And so oftentimes when it comes to coding, especially in SwiftUI, because everything happens here, we don't need, this is all the code for all of this UI and interaction. So that's really crazy if you think about it. In CSS, I would have to have all of this stuff, in a style component or in a CSS file, and I would have to go back and forth a lot. I would have to set up a lot of things to get to the same level of polish, including the save area, for example, and the stacking of the elements and the setup of how we can make it dynamic, including the gesture, so the on top gesture and all the animation behavior. This would take, I would say in CSS, probably double or triple the amount of code, because if you think about the keyframe animation, the states, and then you wouldn't be able to do that in CSS anyways, because you need to use React to sort of like create the logic and the states. But yeah, it would be a lot more challenging. Now, I want to keep my code clean when I'm prototyping or when I'm creating an app. So the first thing I want to do is to extract subview, which is essentially a component. So what I'm going to do here, I'm going to select the Z stack, which is what is seen here. So each stack of card is going to be inside the Z stack. So I can just command click on the Z stack, extract subview, and here I can name it card view. Now the thing is, when you create a component, sometimes you're going to have variables that already exist, and as a result, you're going to have to move these variables. So in this case, it's a state, and that state is for the animation, so I'm going to have to move this as well to the component. And one thing you're noticing is that both of these are components. Even a content view, which is the root component, is sort of like has exactly the same structure. So you can see struct, the name, and then you have the body, which is where we're rendering the UI. So now I'm going to move my state to card view. Thank you for the comment on the shirt. By the way, I love the Apple shirt. If you ever get the chance to visit Apple at their headquarters, they have a very special store where they buy these shirts. By the way, these are my favorite shirts in the world. They're so comfortable. They keep the integrity when you wash them, and I've been wearing them because they're so comfortable. When you work from home, you want to be really, really comfortable. So that's why I always wear them. I just love them. And so here, back to the UI, I have my component. When you do a structural change like this, including a variable, you're gonna have to resume. And if you do that, then we're back, and it works exactly the same way. I didn't make any change at all. But the thing is, I'm inside of a VStack now, and at this point, I can sort of like duplicate my component, and you're gonna see a second card. So that's really cool. But the thing is, I'm gonna need scrolling. So back in the day of UIKit, and I mean it's still now, with storyboard, this is extremely hard to do. The reason why it is hard to do in UIKit and storyboard is that you have constraints. And when you set a new container and you already have constraints in place, it's going to complain about every single thing. In SwiftUI, thankfully, we don't have to deal with any of that thing. So what I'm going to do here, I'm going to put my VStack inside a scroll view. So right now there's no embedding scroll view. I'm just going to use my old technique of embedding VStack first and put scroll view. Boom, That's it, right? This is beautiful. And now I can just scroll my content. That's it. It's just one single step. A lot of designers, when they get into Xcode, especially in the days of storyboard, they were asking, Wang, how do I do a scrolling? And honestly, I would have to explain them multiple steps, and there are just so many things that they have to do to get it working. But with SwiftUI, it's just a simple container. Now, I want to show you another magic. So instead of doing, like copy and pasting multiple times, one thing you can do, so you can command click this, and you can click repeat. Boom, we have 5 cards, just like that. And all of these cards have all the same interactions, and they can all be interacted just like that. So this is really cool. Now, I can set the amount of items that I want. So I can set it to 10, I can set it to 20, I can set it to 50 to sort of like test the performance right away. And feel free to play with this. But if you look at this code right here, it's very readable, it's very expressive, it's very easy to understand from any perspective. If you've done HTML or CSS or anything more advanced than that, this is very easy to read. You have a Z stack, and then this is the background color, and then you have a scroll view, and now we have a stack of elements starting with the text, and then we have 5 cards, and the spacer is no longer needed, to be honest, because we're covering all of the space necessary. The spacer was kind of saying, hey, I want you to push to get all the available space, but now that we are using all of the spaces, then this is no longer needed anyways. So now, super short, super simple, we're gonna get into the Geometry Reader. Are you ready? Because this is where we're gonna have a ton of fun. The Geometry Reader is one of the most powerful things about SwiftUI. It allows you to detect the positioning and the size of any element inside the screen in real time, during scrolling, even during the screen orientation change, the slide over, when you move to the iPad, you move to the iPhone, you move to the Apple Watch. It's going to detect all of those sizes and positioning in real time while you're scrolling, while you're doing any action whatsoever in the screen. So that's really exciting, and that's really powerful. So I'm going to show you how to use that. Now, the first thing is you just need to wrap that inside a Geometry Reader. So I'm going to embed this inside a VStack first, and then instead of VStack, I'm going to set Geometry Reader. And then for my Geometry Reader, I'm getting props, I'm getting values from this. Just like in React, I'm getting values that I can use. So I'm gonna name this Geometry in. And at this point, one caveat about the Geometry Reader, it doesn't always detect the size of your elements, which is why you're gonna see 5 cards stacking up together, and we have this insane drop shadow, which means that now I'm going to have to set the frame of my Geometry Reader. But as soon as I set the frame, then it's going to be able to detect the size and positioning within the screen. And this is oftentimes used to be able to detect the screen dimensions, regardless if it's for the Apple Watch or for the iPad. And it's really good for animations, it's really good for adaptiveness, and screen orientation change. So let's do .frame, max width to .infinity, so we can take the maximum width possible. And I cannot mix and match max width and height. I'm gonna have to set it separately. You can have multiple modifiers of the same type on any element in SwiftUI. So that's why I have 2 frame modifier. So I'm gonna have to set the height to let's say 440. And now you can see that it's working exactly as before. And I can use the geometry value that I'm getting back from a Geometry Reader. So let's use one of the techniques that I love to use in SwiftUI when it comes to setting up interactions. I'm going to add a text to kind of explain to you that we're getting the value in real time. So I'm gonna set a text element, and I'm just gonna put text for now, but you can see we have multiple text elements right here. And what I'm gonna do here, whenever you have a string, you can pass dynamic values. So I'm going to do backward slash parentheses, and I'm gonna get the geometry. And so the geometry is a bunch of values. It has so many things that I can use, and you can see that by doing dot, and you can see that I can get straight to the size, but I can also use the frame values, and I'm gonna use a frame inside the space of global, so the entire screen. And then after the parentheses, which is this value right here, I'm going to get dot min y. Okay, so what is the min y? The min y is the top position, the top position of the y-axis. So you have the x-axis and the y-axis. So the min x would be here, the max x would be here, the min y would be at the top, and the max y would be at the bottom. And this is applicable to every single card. But here's the magic. When I scroll, you can see this number moving and changing in real time. How cool is that? Now you're asking, well, man, what do I do with these numbers? What's the point? Well, the thing is, when you have these numbers, you have superpowers. When it comes to animations, you can use these numbers to cancel, for example, the scrolling on any of these cards. So you can have like a sticky header, for example, or you can apply scale effects, 3D transform effects using these numbers, as long as you can play with the values. Are you ready? So let's play with the values. I want to make it make sense for scale. So what I'm gonna do here, I'm going to set the scale. So first of all, these numbers are way too big. Like I want to be able to sort of like play, because the scale is based on a single digit number, which is 1, right? Like 1 is equal to 100% scale, 2 is equal to a 200% scale. So I need to make sure that these numbers are within 0 and 1. Okay, so you can see already that I can use, let's say I can divide it by 10, for example, and already you're gonna see, okay, instead of 100, it's gonna be 10. If I divide it by 100, it's going to be, you can see at the bottom here it's 7, and at the top here is roughly 1, and at the very top here, so the positioning here is 0. You cannot see the number, but you sort of like can guess. And as I mentioned before, it should be between 0 and 10 and 1, which means that dividing by 1000 makes the most sense. But the thing is, because we're scaling, we want to start with the number 1, because that's the default scale of any element. This card should start at a scale of 1. So what I can do is add 1, and there you can see I can already play with the scale. So when I'm here, I'm going to have a scale of 1, and when I'm here, I'm going to have a scale of 1.42. And so if I copy and paste this value, and I'm going to add a modifier called scale effect, and I'm pasting the value, you're gonna see, voila, it's applying exactly this number to the scale. And when I scroll, you can see that it's animating, okay, in real time because of that value. Now there's just one problem here, and that's because in SwiftUI, if you're using the 3D rotation effect, it can conflict with some other effects. That's the only thing that I've noticed so far about the 3D rotation effect. So what you can do is kind of like to comment it, and now it's no longer going to have that problem. The other thing that I noticed about 3D rotation effect is that if you have a second 3D rotation effect modifier, it's going to pixelate the element as well. So that's kind of the caveat, and that's the only problem with this single modifier. With the other modifier, I haven't really seen a lot of issues such as this, but this is the only one that I noticed with having a problem. But yeah, you know, like this is really cool. You can see that I'm using the scale, and you know, it's kind of like using this cool scale effect that you see in the Safari when you switch the tabs. You know, you go to the tabs mode, and it's going to get into a 3D transformation effect that you scroll. Right now I'm just using the scale, but I could have used the 3D transformation as well, and I'm gonna show you that as well. So, but I'm gonna show you that later. I'm just gonna stick to the plan so that I don't get lost too much. Now, the second thing I want to show you is that when it comes to playing with these values, you know, because there's a lot of context, you know, you have to get to the frame and within what positioning and getting the min y and the min x. You might want to simplify that by passing the variable or by renaming the variable. So what you can do is you can pass the variable to your component, and it's going to be a simpler variable. So let's go and do that. So I'm gonna go to my card view. By the way, in SwiftUI, I can command click here and jump to definition. It's going to jump directly to that component. So now I'm going to create the min y value. So var min y is going to be of type CG float. It's kind of like a React component, right? You can create variables and you can pass variables, except that with SwiftUI you have to be type safe, and it's kind of like using TypeScript in React, so it's safer to use, and you know, it's easier to debug at the end of the day. But it's very important to be type safe, and this is kind of like where languages are moving towards too, which is a great news, because you know, back in the days it was free for all, like you can use any type you want, it doesn't matter. But now it's more and more type safe, right? And that's a good thing. So I'm declaring this min y variable, and then I'm going to move the scale effect to the min y. But before doing that, I need to pass this this value right here. Okay, so I can get what they're suggesting, but sometimes it's not perfect. It's adding a comma because I have the state as well. But anyways, I'm going to just pass the min y, and this is of type CG float. So I'm going to pass this value. By the way, if you want to know what type that we're getting in Xcode, you can option click on this value, and you're gonna see, okay, this is a CG float that I'm getting from the GeometryReader. So that's why I set it up, this variable, to be a CG float as well. So I'm going to move this, well, not move, but I'm going to paste this value to my component, and now I can just move my effect to my Z stack right before untap gesture. So my Z stack is my container, and now I don't need to get the whole geometry value. I can just use the variable that I'm receiving from the parent container. So I can just do and use the min y. And here I have to resume because I changed the structure. It's gonna work exactly the same way, including the scale effects. Next, we're gonna try to apply this transformation only when we are scrolling at this point. So when we are here, we don't want to apply that transformation, okay? We don't want to change the integrity of my UI while we are looking at it from an one-on-one, right? Like, we don't really want to obstruct the viewing of the content as it is now. We just want to do it when we scroll it from this position on and up like this. So what we can do here is to simply add a condition. So we can say, is min y less than 0, question mark. Otherwise, always set it to a scale of 1. So now you can see that it's exactly as before, but when you start scrolling and the min y starts going below 0, that's when the transformation starts, right? And that's kind of like what we wanted. Isn't that cool? So now it makes a lot more sense to browse, while using the app. So next one I want to show you is that we can, so for example, all the interactions are working right now, and we have the scale effect. Let me just, first of all, I'm going to comment the text so that it's not in the way of my UI. And now we can play with the 3D transformation. So what I'm going to do here, I'm going to specifically apply some effects to some of the elements. Well, I can do that, but I'm not going to do that here. Sorry, I misspoke. I'm going to do the transformation. As I mentioned before, this is one way to create it, and you can do the same thing at the bottom of this, but it's a bit more complex. I'm going to share the source code if you want to do that, but I just wanted to keep this very simple and with maximum results. So the next thing I want to show you is that we're going to apply a 3D transformation, so rotation 3D effects, and this is expecting an angle. So angle, parentheses, I'm going to use the degrees. Let's set it about to 10 by default before we get into the dynamic degrees. And I don't need these extra values, I just need the x, y, and z. So let's say 10 for x, 0, 0. And now you can see that it has a 3D transformation effect on the card all the time. This is not affected by the scrolling. If I want to get it affecting the scrolling, then I might want to change the values a little bit. So for example, I can use a min y, okay? But here it's going to complain. Let's see what it's complaining. Well, it's complaining that this value is a CG float, but the angle is of type double. So it's going to give you a great suggestion. It's going to say, hey, do you want to change this into a double? Let's fix it. Great, we're good to go. And boom, wow, look at this ninja UI here. Obviously, you don't want to, give a seizure to your users, so you might want to, divide this number, and let's say divide it by 10 first, and this is a lot better. It's a lot more manageable as well. The other thing you can do is play with the axes, right? And like I mentioned before, this is kind of like the technique that I was using for the swiping of the card in 3D, and using the scroll values. But in this time, it's using a vertical scroll rather than a horizontal scroll. But yeah, you can play with the axes. So now it's like kind of 3D now, and you can use the Z as well. And now it's like a shuriken. You can play with a number. You want to make it sharper or less sharp. Oh yeah, that's what I forgot to show you guys, is that here, if you notice on the Apple Watch, there's not as much gap between the elements, the items, when you scroll. And so one thing you can do here is to add, for the scale effect, there's a property called anchor. And the anchor, it's going to allow you to anchor from the bottom or from the top. And so I'm going to use from the bottom. And if you do that, you're going to see that it's respecting the same sort of gap between each card. And so it looks a lot better now, instead of having a ton of gap when you scroll. But yeah, with the 3D transformation is a ton of fun. As a designer, you should totally play with it. The other thing you can do is to use negative value, so I'm going to use a negative value here, and now it looks even more like the Safari browser. Look at this. How cool is that? And even if you do this, like I can I can still do my interaction that I had before, and it's kind of like mind-blowing what's going on right now. But the purpose of this of this live stream is not necessarily to show you like something that you can necessarily use, but just to show you the power of SwiftUI and how much you can play with it with all the variables in place. And again, I'm going to share all of this stuff so that you can sort of like play around with your own images, with your own content, and at some point, as you play with it, it's going to feel right. And at some point, you're going to be like, well, I can actually put this on my app. But you would have to probably say, okay, this is in a switch mode. So let's say in your app, you're like, hey, how can I switch between the tabs, right? Like I could totally go back here and say, okay, well, the height of my geometry reader should be 200 instead. And now it looks a lot more like the Safari tabs. And I can set it to 10 in terms of the number of, I'm not sure what is the name, but it's like one of those swiping thing. And you can totally, again, play with the angle. Let's say 5 animations going on, or 3D effects, or stuff like that. Please be careful with the performance as well. But since we're prototyping, it's something that can be collaborated with developers. You can ask them questions, hey, and you can also test it yourself. The other thing I need to mention is that the performance is worse on the preview than it is on your device. Your device is going to run a lot smoother, representative of the final performance on your device. So what I can suggest to you is to either preview it on the iPhone, iOS simulator, or if you connect it via USB, you can preview it on your phone. So I can set it to 200, and I also have 2 layers. I can restrict it to a single layer. I don't have to have this show animation. And what else can I do? Well, I think it looks a little bit better at 10, right? It's a lot more manageable. So the way I would use this UI here, I would simply use it if, let's say, I'm switching tabs, I'm switching between cards. So let's say you have a bunch of articles, or let's say you have a bunch of categories in a menu. Then you can click on hamburger menu, for example, and then suddenly it gives you a preview to the content first, and then when you click on that to the normal mode. So that's how I would do it, but today I just wanted to show you the technique for that. So that's basically it for today. We are definitely within the 30-minute zone, and I wanted to kind of like take it easy and to show you how to use the geometry reader, how to apply some of the transformation to create a component, and to use the scroll values from all of that stuff and apply animations to your prototype. Hopefully you enjoyed it. At this point, I'm going to answer some questions, and also I will be sharing the source files so that you can play with it and add your own content. FYI, in the course, I'm going to show I do show you how to create like the data for each of these cards to be different. That's very easy. You just need to pass the variables. You need to set the data structure and all that stuff, and you're going to be able to have different content for each of those cards. So let's go to the questions. All right. What are your thoughts on having the cards fold when they reach near the edge of the screen? Like, would they fold 90 degrees towards the user? I don't really have any thought. I think it's just based on experimentation. If you know what feels right, what feels wrong for you, depends on the use case as well. So one thing I would try to, if you're not sure about something, follow some of the patterns, the UI patterns that Apple is already using on either the Apple Watch or the iOS apps, the Mac, and you know that if Apple use it, it makes sense to the users, right? Like, it's been tested many times over, and so you can start with that. I'm not saying you should stop there. I think you can definitely like improve it over time. You can, you know, make it more interesting by changing your content, by changing the transformation, maybe the scaling, and all of those things. So here, for example, I tried to take the Safari tab switching, and I made it my own. So I applied my own transformations, my own content, and all that stuff until it feels right. And yeah, you know, just play with it. Could you please make a values on all the values that we can use using GeometryReader? I can certainly think about you know, applying more values, not just the min y. There's also my course, which is going to teach more about all of the other values, such as the save area insets and all of that stuff. But GeometryReader is very powerful, and it's all explained in my course if you're interested. I'm new in mobile, but is this possible to Android as well? Everything is possible in Android. The question is, what are the techniques that are going to be used? Is it simple? Is it not simple? And do you need to use the third-party stuff? You know, all of those questions needs to be asked and answered. And more often than not, especially for React Native, from experience, you have to use a lot of you know, third-party libraries to get similar results that you get built in SwiftUI. Okay, more questions. We have a lot of questions right now for some reason. Okay. After completing the design of the prototype, can I install it on my phone so I can show it to others? Absolutely. You can just connect it to your phone. Here I have my phone, and you can run it on your device. It's going to be absolutely beautiful. And let me show you an example of all the things that we teach during the course, you know, like these 3D things, these card things, and this runs very smooth on your device. And that's the whole point of learning SwiftUI, is that you're not just creating a prototype, you're also building a real app that can be used and published to the App Store. I need to make an action to show different views for each card. Absolutely, you can use you know, from what I taught, you know, you just need to use a data model, and then you can create a sample for your array, and then you apply that to your items. So instead of like just repeat based on a number, you're going to use that array, and then you can do a for each, looping that array and getting each item and then applying the data. And then for each component, instead of like clicking to see this, it's going to be clicking to go back to the normal scale and the normal 3D transform and set it to full screen. I can't show it right now because it's a bunch of steps, but that's how I would do it, and it's totally feasible from all the techniques that I have taught. All right, anything else? Is there a way to force a scroll to bottom with GeometryReader? To force the scroll to bottom. I'm not sure if I understand the question, but yeah, I'm not sure if I understand the question. Perhaps someone can answer this one. Can you include some tips on the best practices on lazy loading in SwiftUI? This is definitely a more technical question. So I'm not an expert on the performance stuff and the loading areas and the API stuff, but we do have a lot of great iOS developers in the channel, first of all, but also like Mark, for example. I can suggest you 2 straws for SwiftUI by example. There's Code with Chris. We have many resources. You can Google it. There's a lot of resources for SwiftUI. The iOS community, I would say, is one of the best communities out there, the most friendliest. And you know, you just need to search a little bit and follow my tweets. I have suggested a bunch of them to follow. All right, should designers code? Of course. What kind of question is this? All right, how do we handle having inertia and velocity for implementing a flick interaction? I think this is a very specific question. I think, like I said, it's based on experimentation and depending on a case-by-case scenario. Okay, I think that's really it. Really, I hope you enjoyed this live stream. I'm going to try to do more. If you find that this to be useful, then please give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and follow me on Twitter so that I can inform you of new live streams that are coming. So with that said, have a great rest of the weekend. I'll see you next time. Bye bye.